for joining us.
Morning.
Good morning. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Donna King-Brathwaite. I'm going to be your moderator for today. I'm seeing Daniel Clark Whitehall joining as well. So for those of you who are online, if you could switch your cameras on, that would be great. If it's not possible, I also understand that. Sorry for the noise. Right. We are just going to give a few more people a moment to join us. They're coming in slowly, so just bear with us for about 2 minutes. And I'm also trying to track our panelists to ensure that they are all here. This morning, we are going to be in the company of 5 panelists who will share some of their insights as well. And I hope that you will have some questions for them. This is meant to be an interactive process. So we thank you all for being here. I see Mr. Andy Armstrong is on. Welcome, sir, and thanks for being here. I'm just looking around the room, as it were, to see if I have missed any of our other panelists. Right, so I think we are good to go. And if I'm not mistaken, in the chat, yes, good morning, Shannon, and welcome. Thank you very much for joining us from CYEN. Okay, so just give us a quick minute. I'm going to come back to you in about 2 minutes. As I said, we're going to give a couple people the chance to come in. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, Peggy. Are you hearing us now?
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks.
No problem at all, no problem. We're just giving a few minutes for other persons to join the session before we begin.
Yes, that's Mohammed speaking.
Yes, it is.
Okay, are you chairing this?
No, Donna King-Brathwaite will be chairing the session today.
Hi, Donna. Did you just wave?
Good morning. Yes, good morning, Ms.
Okay.
Antrovos. Welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Yes, good to be here. Thank
Okay,
you
so-
for organizing this.
Very much appreciated that you're here. Okay, so I'm going to begin the session. We are, as I said, awaiting some of our panelists to join in. But very quickly, therefore, let me welcome you to the Stockholm +50 National Consultations in Barbados. In fact, these are more or less conversations around the Stockholm plus 50 process. Some of you may be aware of Stockholm plus 50, the fact that on June 16th, 1972, the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment would have been the first document to take a look at and to recognize the interactions between development, poverty, and the environment. And so 50 years hence, with the increasing environmental challenges and growing inequality, which is also affecting our well-being and affecting all of the development activities that we've been trying to have take place, especially in small island developing states, the global community will be coming together to reflect on the urgent need for actions to address these interconnections and, of course, these challenges. And so 50 years on, we're facing, as you might know, a number of challenges, including climate instability, biodiversity loss, chemical pollution, plastic waste, nitrogen overload, antimicrobial resistance, toxicity, and any number of challenges. And add to that, of course, there's COVID. So I won't be too long on my intro. I will come back to you to sort of set the stage as we proceed this morning. But first, let me welcome all of you to this session. This is the first of 3 dialogues. And today we are going to be focusing in on a healthy planet, the importance of, excuse me, a healthy planet and prosperity for all. And so again, welcome. I thank you for being here. And now it is my pleasure to introduce from the United Nations Development Program, Mr. Mohamed Nagdi, who is the head of Sustainable Solutions, Energy and Climate Change Program for Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean, and he will bring us greetings from the United Nations Development Program. Go ahead, please, Mohamed.
Hi, thanks, Donna. Good morning to one and all, ladies and gentlemen. As Donna would have mentioned, welcome to the first of, 4 leadership dialogues. These are the 3 online consultations that we will be having, and it's going to culminate with an in-person dialogue in the coming weeks. But we do hope that the dialogues will be collaborative and multi-stakeholder with a focus on recommendations that will contribute to the environmental dimensions of the Sustainable Development Goals. And we hope that it will also accelerate implementation of the commitments in the Decade of Action and delivery for sustainable development, including a sustainable recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. So as many of you would know, the UN General Assembly has agreed to convene an international meeting entitled Stockholm Plus 50, a healthy planet for the prosperity of all. Our responsibility, our opportunity in Stockholm on the 2nd and 3rd of June, 2022, during the week of World Environmental Day. So the meeting will commemorate the 50 years since the convening of the UN Conference on the Human Environment. And it is also designed to help accelerate implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals during, as mentioned before, the decade of action, but more importantly, through sustainable recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. So the government of Sweden will host the meeting with the support of the government of Kenya, and the meeting will reinforce the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the creation of the UN Environmental Program, so UNEP at 50. And Barbados is one of 2 Caribbean islands that will be participating in this global initiative. So Stockholm Plus 50 is an opportunity for Barbados to highlight the context of small island developing states in the sustainable recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic and the progress towards the 2030 agenda. The other island in the region is Trinidad and Tobago, and I think that it really places a tremendous emphasis on Barbados in itself to represent the other Caribbean islands, given obviously the existential threat of climate change and the climate crisis as we know it. So the objective of the national consultations is to stimulate an inclusive whole of society and whole of government dialogue on the main themes of Stockholm Plus 50 as they relate to each national context. And this will be achieved through both virtual and in-person platforms, as mentioned, in order for us to generate and identify ideas, insight, and obviously innovation. So the UNDP has been asked to facilitate these national consultations using the resources provided by the government of Sweden and in partnership with the Ministry of Environment and National Beautification for Barbados. And the leadership dialogue should stimulate the meaningful debate at different levels with a range of stakeholders, and starting with today's dialogue, as mentioned by Donna. The second dialogue, which will be tomorrow, achieving a sustainable and inclusive recovery from the coronavirus disease. And thirdly, would be accelerating the implementation of the environmental dimension of sustainable development in the context of the Decade of Action and Delivery for Sustainable Development. So these respective two consultations will also be between 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock online via the Zoom platform. And we're hoping that you can return also to provide your feedback during these sessions. And as mentioned before, there will be a fourth consultation held at the Hilton Hotel on May 3rd from 9 till 2, but this will have a major focus on youth and the feedback coming from the youth. As you know, it's really for them to inherit it from us, and it's important for their voice to be led towards the consultation, the consultative process. So the timeline for Stockholm Plus 50, the preparations, they coincide with a critical period for the countries and their global commitments under the Paris Agreement on climate change. And as you know, countries would have revised and enhanced their national determined contributions ahead of COP26 in Glasgow last year in November. And it really defined critical targets and strategies for keeping global warming below 1.5 degrees. And as you know, within the region, we do say 1.5 to stay alive. And these pledges reflect and are integrated into national and sectoral development policies, strategies, budgets, and targets, including other environmental commitments. So the NDCs are critical gateways for ambitious action, not only to achieve the Paris Agreement, but also the Sustainable Development Goals as a whole. They offer key political signals on the direction of development that the countries plan to take. And targets in the NDCs on energy, adaptation, nature-based solutions, gender, and many other areas provide a national pathway to transform economies and societies and contribute to many of the outcomes of the Stockholm Plus 50 process. As such, the ongoing NDC revision, planning, and implementation process also provides a strong foundation for the Stockholm meeting preparations. So the UNDP recognizes the NDCs as a critical gateway for ambitious action. And the discussions and critical points raised during these leadership dialogues will inform this. I would also like to end by thanking Professor Winston Moore and Ms. Crystal Drakes for their support in leading these dialogues and the strong partnership with the University of the West Indies and the Ministry of the Environment, which is so critical towards ensuring that these consultative processes are successful. So we look forward to robust discussions over the next few weeks, led by each of these the wonderful panelists that we do have planned for these sessions. And we hope and we anticipate strong input from our participants. So thanks to one and all.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, it's now my pleasure to introduce very briefly our panelists. You will be hearing more from them as each will be called on to make a 5-minute or so presentation on the topic that we're discussing today. So I'm going to begin with Mr. Travis Sinclair, who is the Senior Environmental Officer with the Ministry of Environment and National Beautification, Government of Barbados. Mr. Reginald Burke, the Executive Coordinator of the Caribbean Youth Environment Network. Mr. Andy Armstrong, Chairman of the Green Committee for the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Ms. Carrie-Anne Eiffel, the former President of the Senate and currently the President of the Barbados Council for the Disabled. And Ms. Dr. Joyce St. John, the Executive Director of the Caribbean Public Health Agency. Dr. St. John will be joining us shortly. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, we welcome all of you again, and we are going to share with you a short video which sets the stage for our discussions here today. So please enjoy, and I'll be back with you in a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Can I quickly confirm that you're also both seeing and hearing the video?
We are seeing but not hearing.
Seeing but not hearing. 72 global leaders.
You should be hearing now, yeah?
Yes.
Wonderful, thank you. I'll restart it.
In 1972, global leaders came together in Sweden for the first ever United Nations Conference on the Human Environment. It was unlike any previous event, bringing together 113 governments to discuss humanity's impact on the natural world.
It is clear that the environmental crisis which is confronting the world will profoundly alter the future destiny of our planet. No one amongst us, whatever our status, strength, or circumstance, can remain unaffected.
The human environment will always change. Development will continue. There will be growth. This cannot and should not be avoided. The decisive question is in which direction we will develop, by what means we will grow, which qualities we want to achieve, and what values we wish to guide our future.
I think the lasting message of the Stockholm Conference will be the realization that man has come to one of those seminal points in his history where his own activities are the principal determinants of his own future.
Now, 50 years after that Stockholm meeting, we face a triple planetary crisis of climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss, as well as other planetary ills that are affecting our current and future well-being.
This triple crisis is our number one existential threat, and we need an urgent all-out effort to turn things around.
An unhealthy planet threatens human health, prosperity, equality, and peace, as we have seen only too clearly in COVID-19. It also threatens the achievement of SDGs. In this moment of truth, we need to urgently work to transform our economies and societies. The science is clear. The solutions are known. We need whole of society action for a whole of society problem. We know it can be done. The world came together to fix the ozone layer, phase out leaded fuel, and stop endangered species from going extinct. With this in mind, the UN General Assembly has decided to convene an international meeting entitled Stockholm Plus 50, a healthy planet for the prosperity of all, our responsibility, our opportunity. It will be held in Stockholm, Sweden, from the 2nd till the 3rd of June 2022. It will commemorate the 50 years since that 1972 watershed moment when the environment took center stage for the first time. There is only one Earth, and the stakes have never been higher. Join us. In 1972, global leaders.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing. As I said, the video basically sets the context for why we are here and what we are trying to achieve today. So I'm going to move very, very smoothly, I believe, into introducing our panelists. And at this stage, each panelist has been invited to give a 5 to 7 minute short presentation around the subject of reflecting on the urgent need for actions. But before we do that, let me just sort of set the stage for us somewhat. As I mentioned earlier, 50 years after Stockholm, we are faced with some serious environmental challenges. And I think I might have listed a few of them already: climate instability, biodiversity loss, toxicity, rising toxicity through reduced and altered ecosystems, goods and services. Basically unprecedented challenges for humanity and for our security. In fact, our insecurity, I believe, has never been so badly impacted and affected. But in all of this too, there is the negative impact of health. There's the eroding capabilities and the limiting of present and future development opportunities. These challenges are simply, almost out of control. Inequality and imbalance are also evident in the use of our natural resources, where the economic benefits and the environmental and social burdens are asymmetrically distributed across countries and regions. Adjusting for planetary pressures, very few, if any, countries can deliver on high levels of human well-being in a way that is compatible with sustainable development. In fact, between 1990 and 2014, for example, produced capital grew at an average annual rate of 3.8%, while health and education-induced human capital grew at a rate of around 2.1%. However, in the meantime, natural capital decreased at an annual rate of 0.7%. The 2030 Agenda and the COVID-19 crisis have center-staged the relationship of human progress and the prosperity to a healthy environment. COVID-19 has caused unprecedented economic and social stresses. I'm sure we can all agree on that. In 2020, there was a sharp reduction across all three dimensions of the Human Development Index, which are health, knowledge, and living standards. The crisis continued into 2021 with human development levels remaining well below pre-COVID-19 levels. Global debt has surged. Countries are facing several financial and long-term economic risks if this is not addressed. In the 1980s and 90s, the general understanding was one of economy, society, and environment being the three legs of a development stool. But today, it is clear that without tackling planetary crises, human actions are going to definitely pull the proverbial rug out from under both societies and economies' feet. And this, of course, is going to just result in further distress and further insecurity. So this insight has sharpened with the experience of COVID-19, of course. And during that time, and during this time, because it is ongoing, this invisible virus has threatened to halt economic progress, plunge millions into poverty, impacted social stability, and has exposed poor and emerging economies to very high levels of personal and sovereign debt. Planetary and other threats are all leading to a systemic crisis of human development and growing human insecurity. We've got the crisis of food insecurity. We are seeing widespread displacement. There is the cry for a high level of joblessness. There is considerably more visible inequality. And of course, let us not forget that all of these are leading to unprecedented conflicts as well. And so now to our panelists. Having set the stage, I now invite Mr. Andy Armstrong, who is the chairman of the Green Committee of the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry, to share with us his thoughts around today's discussion. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Armstrong, and welcome.
Okay, well, my pleasure. Thank you, Donna, and good morning to everyone. So as I reflected on this, I thought of the German legend of Faust. And if you remember, Faust met the devil at the crossroads. And the devil said, I will give you material wealth and knowledge beyond all expectation. The only thing is that you have to give me your soul. And Faust made that bargain. At the end of the day, it wasn't a good bargain for him, although he did enjoy the material wealth while he lived. Sometimes it feels to me that us as a collective species, we've made a similar bargain because we have, for many of us, material wealth that our ancestors couldn't even have dreamed of. But we've swapped that. The price is the health of our planet. And as we're now seeing too, the health of us as individuals, because the effects of air pollution and many other things on our health. So to me, it's not a great bargain. But you also have to think that the people on this call, we all tend to be, let's say, comfortable in our situation. we don't have to worry about where our next meal is going to come from or where we're going to be sleeping tonight. And there's a lot of people in the world, and even in Barbados, in that situation. So they're not going to have the same empathy for the environment because they have more basic needs to fill. I thought about the whole dilemma that Barbados has, and many countries around the world. You have lovely beaches, which we as Barbadians can enjoy, but we want more jobs. So we encourage developers to come and put up large hotels on the beach. The price is, of course, that then the beaches, although they're still public, they're less accessible. And that when you have a beach covered down in beach chairs and you just want to go there and enjoy it, it becomes much more difficult. But you ask the person who got a job constructing the hotel and those who are working in the hotel if that was a good bargain, and probably they're going to say, yeah, that was a good bargain. And I'm not suggesting Barbados stop developing hotels, but there's a couple of things I think we should look at. One would be to make sure that every new hotel follows the Green Globe guidelines. So should be Green Globe certified, which is meaning that they're sustainable. And the second thing I think is Barbados should continue to push the Welcome Stamp initiative. So you're familiar, I think, with the Welcome Stamp initiative. I had a chat again this morning with Peter Thompson, who was one of the driving forces. And he said in the first year we had 2,000 households sign up for that. And each one spent an average of $55,000 a year in Barbados. So in the first year, the Welcome Stamp program brought in $110 million to Barbados. And they did that with a much smaller environmental footprint than the average tourist would leave. And even more important, I think they had a very positive social impact because many of those Welcome Stampers got out into the community and they did things that we've been trying for years to encourage the tourists to do, which is to get out into the community and experience Barbadian life. So I would very much want to see that we continue to push the Welcome Stamp initiative at least as much as we push building new hotels. The other thing I'll just touch on briefly is I'm now in my early 60s, but I've grown up in the sea, I should say, because our family has always been some keen fishermen, not so much myself, but keen scuba divers or snorkelers. So I've been snorkeling and scuba diving around Barbados since the 60s, you would say. And what I can say is up to the mid 70s, and I'm talking about the West Coast now, the reefs on the West Coast, maybe they were starting to show their stress, but they were still really good. You know, there was lots and lots of coral, lots and lots of good sized fish. And it was really a joy to snorkel there. You go now and the overwhelming feeling is sadness because most of the reefs are just bare rock with maybe a little bit of moss growing on them. And if you see a nice piece of coral, that's something to comment on. So we really haven't done a great job on protecting our nearshore reefs, certainly on the West Coast. Couple of things we should be doing. I mean, one simple thing is we should have permanent buoys on certain areas. So if pleasure craft want to come to an area, they just pay a small fee and they tie up at that buoy, but they're not allowed to drop their anchor because in a lot of cases, they will drop the anchor in the wrong place. We should also look at the same way that we banned the taking of sea eggs to allow them to recover. There's other species we should consider. Parrotfish, of course, are really good for the reef development. And I seriously think we should look at a ban, even if it's a short-term ban on the taking of parrotfish. And also we should ban the use of scuba equipment for people to catch lobsters, sea eggs, fish, because the problem with the scuba equipment is we can get down as deep as the fish are going to be. And basically we give the fish almost no chance at all. Whereas if you're free diving, the fish can dissipate and go somewhere else. So that's some simple things I'd like to see done. And I think probably, Donna, I've hit 5 minutes, so I can comment more later, but that's it for me for now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Armstrong, and for your insight, and also for bringing some concrete measures that perhaps we do need to consider in a forum such as this. Thank you so much again. Okay, so next up, we have our panelists representing the Caribbean Youth Environment Network, Mr. Reggie Burke. Reggie, we'd appreciate hearing from you at this time. Thank you.
Hello, good morning, colleagues. You must excuse me not using the camera. This time I'm not in a position to do so. I have a few comments to make this morning. I don't think I'll take 5 minutes. Certainly 7 minutes would be necessary. But I thought I would make some comments generally about the direction we should be going in as relates to environmental management in Barbados. First of all, as I am representing a youth organization, although I'm not a youth, I'm more a youth leader and a mentor, but I have a strong background in natural resources management. So just let me start by saying, and I'm going to put the plug in here for youth, the whole concept of sustainable development is based on futuristic thinking, and therefore we have to put more of a focus when we're looking at environmental management on young people. They must be involved in everything that we do. The biggest challenge, of course, will be to ensure that they're fully engaged and receptive in what we are doing. So we have to give them a fair chance. The second point I want to make is that if we're going to be serious about natural resources management, we must have all of our citizens engaged. Citizens have to see themselves as part of the management process. I believe generally citizens in Barbados will look towards the Ministry of Environment, let's say, as the people who manage the environment, not understanding that is the Ministry of Environment that sets or creates a policy space for the average citizen to act within. And the average citizen is an environmental manager, even if he or she doesn't see that. It is their collective actions that really make the difference for environmental management in the country. The third point I'd like to make is that we have to move this concept of environmentalism and natural resources management into popular culture. One of the things I've been recognizing is that if you want to get people really out and engaged in something, something has to be there has to be a cultural dimension and dynamic to it. And I think that's slightly lacking at this point in time. So that's one of my recommendations, is that we have to get out of the esoteric into the happening. People have to feel that this is something that they have to do, it's part of them, like how we believe Calypso is part of us. As I said before, for the fourth point, I'm just going to reiterate this, and I don't want anybody to take this in the wrong way. But I believe that governments, yes, the government sets the policy framework, but I think that the citizens and private sector have to see their role in environmental management and in their role in society generally as more than just one of being hard dollars and cents profit making. A lot of times we see the dollar as the bottom line, and in fact, we may have to look at some of the softer stuff, the less intangible stuff, as being a very important aspect of what we do in Barbados. in Barbados doing lots of stuff related to the environment. Some people are just repeating the same thing when many of them, or I should say many of us should work together to maximize what we can, the benefit we can get. In addition, we have to learn how to coordinate nationally. That is, the civil society actors should be working in concert with the government actors and not against government actors, or not being driven by outside forces who have other agendas. So these are my initial remarks. I hope I would have made some sense to some of you, and I will make further remarks as we go on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reggie. Good food for thought, I'd say. Just definitely reminding us that the responsibility for environmental management cannot lie on the shoulders of one entity or one set of persons. Yes, correctly said, government is responsible for policy, but in terms of our own survivorship, in terms of reaching our sustainable development goals, certainly, sorry about that. I think we have a weather alert of some sort, my apologies. But certainly as it relates to where we go to next, how we tackle sustainable development issues, it is certainly an all of society responsibility. And yes, we do have to find ways and means of getting people involved, taking action, and hopefully coming out of this process, we can have some sound recommendations as to how to do that, because certainly we can't do the same old, same old. And lastly, your point about the youth. Indeed, they're going to have to be the ones who deal with the issues that we are facing. And we're hoping that the issues will not be more severe. But the reality is they are there. And we do have to, take a look very closely at how we engage the youth in a more meaningful way. And so, as you would have heard Mohammed say earlier this morning, there will be the opportunity to engage our youth. But I take your point, Reggie, that youth engagement has to be an ongoing process. In fact, when I think about this process that we are engaged in right now, it is coming to us in two phases. This phase, which runs April to June, and then from June to October, there's going to be continued dialogue, continued conversation, so that we can take a closer look at what is going to be needed. And at this juncture, I believe that environmental governance is perhaps the focus that this grouping and the whole Stockholm process should probably be taking on, certainly at the national level in the context of Barbados. So thank you very much. So at this stage, we just want to get a sense of who is in the room. And I'm going to invite you now to take a very short poll, what we call a demographic poll. Sam or our colleague from UNDP will have that poll up for you. And we're just going to ask you to just go right ahead and fill in those spots there. It's, believe it or not, it's multiple choice. So please go ahead. We are dealing with a healthy planet and prosperity for all. We are going to ask you, for example, your age, not directly, not trying to be nosy, and that is entirely up to you. We're asking you about your gender as well as a stakeholder group that you are representing. So please go right ahead and participate in the poll. And you've just got a couple of minutes.
I just wanted to let you know that I have.
Yes.
I just wanted to let you know that I am here.
Thank you very much, Dr. St. John. Thanks for joining us. And we'll be coming to you shortly for your presentation. Thank you. So if you can indicate that you're able to see the poll and that you're able to complete it, we would be very happy for that. Okay, so, all right. So has everyone managed to complete the poll, or do you need another minute? You're free to indicate, please. Mhm. Okay. Mhm. Okay.
Hi, Donna, just giving a quick update. So far, we have 21 answers out of 30. So if you can just give it another minute and hopefully participants are able to respond. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Sam.
Okay, we are at 24 now. So I'm not seeing any other responses. So if anyone is still responding, please indicate us. Otherwise, I think we can carry on.
Great. Thank you very much, Sam. And thank you, colleagues, for participating in the poll. Now we're going to move smoothly again on to our third panelist to do her introduction, Dr. Joy St. John. Dr. St. John, we are looking forward to hearing from you, especially given the title of today's discussion, Healthy Planet and Prosperity for All. And you are able to share your screen with our colleagues. I'm aware that you do have a presentation prepared. If you're having technical difficulties.
The host has disabled.
Okay.
Participant screening. So can you all share the presentation?
Hi, Dr. St. John. You should be able to share. Try again.
Yes. Right.
Thanks very much. So I want to thank you for the opportunity. I want you to tell me if you can see my presentation up on the screen and if you can see it in slideshow. And yes, I am wonderful. I'm going to give you the careful response to this very wonderful consultation. So I'm starting first by letting you know what we do in the Environmental Health and Sustainable Development Department of the Caribbean Public Health Agency, which deals with environmental health and sustainable development. And I'll tell you a bit more about sustainable development. So it's quite a bit from waste management to freshwater energy and mineral assets. And we have some very good partners in environmental health. The German government, GIZ, we're supporting the region, including the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, and we also do climate change actions in this department. So why is sustainable development critical to a healthy planet? Because we need both sustainable and regenerative development approaches, and we're aiming to using the Earth's natural resources wisely, because regenerative development goes beyond sustainable development. It's the emphasis on management of natural resources. and it seeks to build capacities and capabilities of life supporting systems. So it's not the environment in a microcosm, it's all about supporting healthy life. So we've discovered on many occasions that holistic, multi-sectoral strategies are required. And I heard the previous speaker talking about targeting youth, and this is my emphasis as well. Targeting youth education, awareness, and sensitization, so they feel empowered to act, because the youth think about innovation. They naturally go there. And we need that energy and that new thinking to solve complex, current, global, regional, and national problems, bringing it right down to the CARICOM region. So the EHSD Department of CARFA has been embarking on regional capacity building to create intersectoral multidisciplinary leaders. And we're also using a One Health approach, because we are aware that to solve problems affecting people, we need to know about animal, agricultural, environmental health. This touches on the emergence of zoonotic diseases, antimicrobial resistance. And if you look at the diagram, you see that it is a continuum. Healthy people, healthy environment, healthy animals. One thing that COVID-19 has taught us is that the world is interconnected. So local disease outbreaks create global risk, and distant outbreaks cause issues locally. And there's also in the world right now a convergence of a range of risks and crises. Climate change, the Ukraine invasion, and if that develops into war, the issues of not paying attention to biodiversity. So there must be institutional change with all sectors. We're working together towards more comprehensive health security. People think about security as something to do with police, but there is health security as well. So the Environmental Health and Sustainable Development Department's work with marginalized and vulnerable groups is important, because if we don't do that walk with everyone, then in the end, everyone is affected. I'm just giving you an example of some work that we're doing with GIC and IRECO with marginalized women, the poor, and fishers. And it's all about developing a public-private partnership to reduce marine pollution from pleasure vehicles in tourism centers. And it involves construction of a berthing jetty in Soufrière, Dominica, to improve livelihood of those vulnerable people, especially now that they've been impacted by past hurricanes Maria and Irma. So what are some of the ways in which we are making sure that we have our baseline and we are monitoring what's happening with the environments through our interventions? And that is surveillance. CARFA is big on surveillance. It's one of our foundation functions for the CARICOM region. And public health surveillance is key because it lets us understand the relationship between environmental hazards, including those agents like toxic agents that cause harm, and health outcomes and exposure to environmental media, the air, the water, soil, food. And how have we been doing our surveillance? Well, look on the right, that whole long list is all the different data sets for environmental health and sustainable development that we put into our overall surveillance to see how environment is impacting health and vice versa. And we've not only done data sets, but we've done interventions like webinars. We have a draft regional framework for an integrated monitoring and surveillance system for water quality, reports on analysis of results of mold assessment from indoor air quality. So we're really trying to capture all of those environmental media, air, water, soil, food, finding out what are the data sets there and letting people know. And then finally, what are some of the sustainable public health themes that we've gained or learned during the COVID-19 pandemic? And on the left, there's a long list again. The issue of how one tiny microorganism can affect economic and environmental sustainability, the need for strengthened partnerships, the all of us society approach that the heads of government used in responding to COVID-19, especially in the early stages of phases of this pandemic, have proved to be successful in terms of keeping our numbers relatively low, numbers of cases of illness and numbers of cases of death. So in all of our discussions, I'm hoping there are some things that come through. The need to augment our health systems and take cognizance of the environment and the sustainability of the environment, the need to reach out to the community, and the need to empower our young people towards ensuring betterment of public health. Thank you for listening.
Dr. St. John, thank you kindly for painting a clear picture of the region's health concerns in your presentation and how these are really and truly impacting sustainable development as our major target in all that we are doing at this time, and for also sharing with us the positive activities of a whole of society, whole of government sort of approach to dealing with COVID and the successes that we are seeing as small island developing states regionally. So thanks again for that. And we are looking forward to you continuing in this discussion today. Next, I'm going to ask you, remember that we just did the poll. So just for everyone's information, I'm going to ask Sam just to give us a brief on the results that we've gotten so far. I believe that we are having a median in terms of the age groups who are represented in this particular conversation. Sam? Yes.
Yes,
So,
thank you, Donna. I just started sharing the results. Yeah, can you please confirm whether you can see them?
I can. I'm hoping
Yes.
that our participants can. Great, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. So I'll let you browse through, but just to give a few tips on significant information. So we have a majority of participants within the age group of 31 to 50 years old. In terms of gender balance, it's pretty balanced. As we can see, there's 13 females and 11 males, so almost 50% each. And then in terms of the stakeholders participating, the NGO CSO are taking the lead with 8 members, 8 participants. I see a lot of members have indicated other, so I'm not sure if anyone wants to jump in and add a few details on that. And then in terms of the sectors represented, there's an overwhelming majority for environment. So environment and natural resources management. And finally, the participants, half of the participants were aware of the Stockholm Conference of 1972 prior to this consultation, and the other half was unaware. So I think that's all. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sam. Okay, so next up, I am going to ask this will now be our 4th panelist, Mr. Travis Sinkler, the Senior Environmental Officer with the Ministry of Environment and National Beautification, to share his thoughts on today's theme.
Hi.
Thank you very much for joining us again, Travis.
Hi, good morning, Madam Chair, and just forgive me, I've been having some technological issues. I've changed devices, and now I have this audio but no video. Perhaps I can get it fixed, after this presentation. I want to thank everyone again. I want to thank you, of course, thank the United Nations Development Program for supporting this process, and also in terms of UWI, in terms of its technical support. I also want to say thanks to the fellow panelists as well. I know this has been really, for lack of a better, a rushed process for us, but we are in a space where things are happening quite quickly. And I really want to hand it to UNDP's focal point, Mohammed Naig, for saying, that we just have to do it, given the contract, and so that at least our voices could be added to the global process. As I was thinking about this presentation, I spoke to Donna and others about, what can we really focus on? Just because there are a plethora of issues, and Dr. St. John framed quite nicely a number of them that intersect the health environment context. And, but yes, there are quite a number of processes, policy instruments that the government of Barbados and the globe are involved in. And I think environmental governance, environmental multilateralism over the last 50 years, in terms of how, hello?
We're hearing you, Travis. We're still hearing you. Mm-hmm.
Yes, in terms of how it has evolved, it is really placing a burden on small countries like Barbados. But again, I think in all of this, there's opportunity, and I think it calls on us really perhaps to plan better, to coordinate better, and to be a bit more strategic. But I want to reflect back to 1972. There are three things, three interventions in 1972. The first being that song by Dr. Hook and the Medicine Show, Sylvia's Mother, that some of you would know. Reggie, I can see your hand up. And then but there were also two other songs, Where's the Love by Roberta Flack and Hurting Each Other by the Carpenters. And I think that those two last songs perhaps sum up what was happening at the time in terms of the environmental crisis that we were faced with. You recall Rachel Carson's Silent Spring and the DDT issue, how it was killing birds, and this whole link to cancers in humans. We also, the issues of the air quality and the threat of nuclear meltdown. And there were the issue of pollution at the time, really in all forms, really was the big issue that the world was faced with. And hence this issue on the human environment at the 1972 conference. And I think it's important that we reflect on that and where we have journeyed to. Interestingly, just 2 years prior to 1972, the first Earth Day, and we just celebrated Earth Day this year. Again, that was a citizens' movement in response to these issues, the contamination of water, the industrialization and urbanization and whatnot. And I found a quote from a Sebastian Buckup. He's the head of programming for the World Economic Forum, and in what he wrote in 2016 was back then the fears over environmental devastation, nuclear war, and a taking of the population bomb pick holes in an almost religious belief in technological progress. In 1972, this 1 year after what they call the Nixon shock, the Club of Rome released the influential report Limits to Growth, which pretended the collapse of societies around the world unless leaders constrain the use of resources and industrialization. He wrote, continue, suddenly technology was speeding up in terrifying ways, straining the limits of the planet and the mind. He concluded by Alvin Toffler's bestseller, Future Shock, hit a nerve, stating that our brains are ill-prepared for the pace of change, progress, turn into disruption. And so that was the mentality and the framing, along with obviously several other issues. But since then, we've seen some progressive milestones in terms of environmental governance, environmental multilateralism. We know of the birth of UNEP in 1972. We also saw the development of ministries of environment, particularly in the 1980s. Certainly that happened for Barbados. And then in the early 90s, we witnessed the Rio Convention, the Earth Summit of 1992, and instruments such as the Global Environment Facility, and a special focus on the SIDS agenda. The Barbados Program of Action was born here. Stockholm also played a key role in the adoption of the UNCLOS, the UN Convention of Law of the Sea. And also it led to this issue of addressing the ozone layer. It also gave sowed the seeds for environmental education. I know Donna, that is her forte. And certainly we've seen how that has evolved over time in things such as education for sustainable development. The last 10 years, there have been several other developments. The Rio +20 process, which was basically 40 years after Stockholm, called for a new focus on integration, coordination, and cohesion. And that led to what we have before us, Agenda 2030, a focus on the blue and the green, and blue and green economy, and things such as the Paris Agreement. Just this year, in again 50 years since UNEP, the UN Environment Assembly adopted or paid particular focus on what is now called the triple planetary crisis that Donna would have alluded to. So while yes, pollution 50 years ago continues to be a major problem, we now have the issue of biodiversity loss and climate change. The Fifth Assembly this year also agreed to the creation of a new international instrument, which is looking at plastics and how we address plastics globally because of what we're seeing in our various ecosystems. It also had a resolution on building that science policy, that evidence base. Now, I laid that out because I see Professor Mahan here, and we're in a group dealing with the oceans, and there was a statement that was made on Friday regarding the things that we have to celebrate, and given where he has operated within, he wasn't sure he's enthused. He felt that perhaps we've worked hard and we aren't seeing progress. But I think by the end of that exchange in that group, Belize was able to share of their commitment to ocean space, and I believe that made him smile. I say all of this because the challenges from the 70s continue. There are more, but I think there's been a progressive development of policies, programs, plans. The complexities are more. We are one global space more and more. And to add to that, we have a pandemic. So again, I think that framing, but I think we have a lot to celebrate. Back home to Barbados, and despite the multiple multilateral environmental agreements, multiple development frameworks, we are still dealing with some major issues. And I want to reflect very quickly on the National Environmental Summary of 2010. It outlines 7 key challenges, one being the inadequacy and reliability of freshwater supply, the high cost and inefficient use of energy, coastal ecosystems degradation, inadequate waste management, limited land space and inefficient land use, inefficient traffic systems and supporting infrastructure, and natural disasters and the threat of climate change. And those things would have arisen, would have been framed in the National Development Plan in 2006 to 2025. what is interesting is that the National Environmental Summary, which really represented a national conversation with a number of key stakeholders as to what the issues and how we responded, outlined a number of actions. And I want to just hone in on a few of them. First, it talked about mainstreaming environment into the overall national policy framework. It spoke of improving the legislative and enforcement framework, increasing private sector and non-governmental multi-stakeholder participation, achieving positive attitudinal changes in citizens by way of education, establishing environmental standards, as well as improving systems for information gathering, building capacity by ways of increasing manpower and professional development, and last but not least, implementing more initiatives based on horizontal and regional cooperation. Now, these things aren't, they were extremely important, but there's a playbook. Every 10 years, we seem not to be able to move sufficiently on these things. And these are the very things that we're faced with today, not only in Barbados, but as a globe. And I think that as we look at this Stockholm process and support from UNDP, how we find space to hone in on them, zero in on these things, and try to build that momentum to deal with these systemic, structural, environmental governance issues. The last part of my presentation, I would like everyone, as you get to look at the Barbados Charter, Article 4. And the Article 4, the opening says, everyone has the right to live in a healthy and balanced environment and has a duty to participate in its preservation, conservation, enhancement, and regeneration. It goes on, we appreciate the defining importance of our land and sea to our identity and way of life, and therefore also pledge to protect the free and unrestricted access to all our beaches and public spaces, which is an inalienable right of every Barbadian. These are the things that have been adopted in our Parliament of Barbados. And it reflects our will. And so again, as we think of Stockholm, how do we give effect to this? Andy would have raised the issue of development and beach access and whatnot. How does that correlate with what we see in this charter? And how do we bring synchrony in our actions so that, again, there will be trade-offs, but at least getting everyone on page. I wanna support certainly Dr. St. John's point on the need for holistic, multi-sectoral approaches. What Reggie said about youth engagement, if you look at the statistic, the 0 to 18, there's no one here. And yes, that may be logistics. And I know Mohammed has been really big on ensuring that there's a youth consultation. And that statistic further supports that idea. I think this science policy and business space, how we get the university to pay more, to be involved with government, to help build that evidence base in a systemic, in a partnership or oriented way will be important. And last, I think the idea of government citizens engagement, so government citizen and a business pact, a new pact for the next 50 years to promote inclusive environmental governance. I think these are things that we can look at as we go through this process. I want to finish with two songs from 1972 and a hit song by Bill Withers. I'm not going to sing. Lean on Me. That I think that is quite apt. And for my female participants, also Helen Reddy's I Am Woman. Just to make the point that the gender dynamic in environment, I think, is understated and we need to play it up. But also is important that we bring that in our analytical space to get everyone on board. I want to thank you. Over.
Thank you very much, Travis, for setting the stage, so to speak, as to what it is that we need to get out of a process like the Stockholm Plus 50 process that we are engaging in today. I hear your call for a more marked effort in terms of environmental governance. I also welcome to today's forum Dr. Robin Mahan, Dr. Patrick McConney. There are a number of people in this chat who have for many years, certainly in my lifetime, have been making the call for environmental governance, for a holistic approach to how we deal with our environmental issues. And for Barbados, I think it is very important that we use this process, as you've correctly said, to take a look closely at our science policy interface. How do we engage government and business and our institutions of learning, especially UWI, in this process as well, and how it is that we move forward. We cannot be seeing the same results every 10 years that we've been seeing for the last umpteen decades. So thank you very much for those very salient points. As we move forward, I just want to let you know that Barbados is currently joining just Trinidad and Cuba in this Stockholm +50 national consultation process in the region. Now that is three nations basically out of a number of Caribbean nations. This process is also a follow-up to an ongoing international preparatory process with a multi-stakeholder regional consultation that took place on April 6, 2022. You might also wish to note that the consultations are framed around the leadership dialogue themes. I believe Mohammed might have alluded to this earlier, but they're specifically contextualized for Barbados. As I mentioned earlier, we're taking a two-phase approach, phase 1 from April to May, and then phase 2 from June to October, so the conversation continues. And of course, the overall overarching focus for us in Barbados especially would be building inclusive environmental governance, as Travis would have alluded to in his presentation. So again, thank you very much. Right, so we will get the ball rolling therefore with a couple of questions. So what is going to happen here is I am going to try to engage our panelists a little bit with some specific questions just to get the conversation going, but we also want to hear from you, our participants as well. I'm going to throw out our very first our very first point of thinking. I don't want to call any names per se among the panelists. And then after they respond, perhaps we can hear from you, our participants, your thoughts on this particular issue as well. So I'm just going to jump right in. In Barbados, are we aware of the state and limits of our natural environment? Are we truly aware? I know Mr. Armstrong would have alluded to some concerns that he has with the marine environment, but I am going to ask, perhaps the best person to answer, Travis, and please don't shoot me, might be you in terms of, are we aware of the state and the limits of our natural environment at this time? Oh, I see Dr. St. John's hand, so Travis, you're saved. Go ahead, please, Dr. St. John.
Oh, I was going to say that what gets measured gets done and gets understood. And CARFA has done an intervention because we advocate sustainable management of resources. And there's a 5-year project with IWECO, integrating water, land, and ecosystem management. And CARFA's partnered with CERME's UE to complete spatial assessments of the exposure to sargassum influxes due to climate change. Now, this is relatively hot off the press, but this piece of information is going to be really critical for understanding the frequency and severity of sargassum beaching events around the entire coastline. More than one country, but Barbados was also mapped, and overlaying detailed countrywide information on several sectors, including fisheries, for example, landing sites, fishing grounds, for tourism, hotels, and other tourism infrastructure, ports, beaches, and for coastal communities and coastal habitats, coral reefs, seagrass beds, mangroves, and MPAs. So that kind of information, I hope, is duplicated in other areas and will help Barbados to really understand the issues. Over.
Thank you very much, Dr. St. John. Very, very good information, and we're happy to hear about the cooperation, the partnership between CARFA and CERMES. And you did speak earlier to the importance of partnerships. I believe that every panelist so far has echoed the importance of partnership to our quest for sustainable development. Thank you again. Travis, do you have a response to question 1, or can I go on to, there's another question, I believe, from Dr. Mahan. And I'm just going to read it as it has been stated. Regarding environmental governance, could the panel reflect on the failure in Barbados to put in place basic environmental protection measures? The Environmental Management Act has been in draft for over 30 years. The Marine Pollution Control and Fisheries Acts have been in place since the early 90s with few, if any, regulations. Fisheries and pollution are probably the reason for the dead reefs Andy Armstrong would have spoken of. Are we really serious about environment governance? How can we change this lack of performance? If we are serious, why was the environmental pillar missing from the recent government manifesto, which spoke directly to the social and economic pillars of sustainable development, but not environment? Travis, I'm going to begin with you on this one, please.
Sure, and thanks again, and I want to thank Robin for the question. I think Robin probably knows the answers, but for the sake of I think this is a good discussion point. You know, I remember I was in a meeting. It was dealing with climate change, and one of the things that the Prime Minister was chairing, and one of the things she said was the role of advocacy and the actions of policymakers. I came into environment in the 90s, early 90s. I actually left business and accounting, and I came in. And one of the things that at the time, we had movements. We had the Barbados Environmental Association. I believe Donna and others were even involved in the march against the Greenland landfill. So there was a Barbados Environmental Youth Program. The National Trust had an environmental program. Those things, you do see things like in Future Center Trust, you see CYN. But in terms of that bold advocacy, we're not having it. And I mean, this is something that has to come literally from the belly of persons. I know that there are lots of things, lots of distractions from the environmental issue. Robin referred to the fact that how he views it not being in the actual manifesto. But the question is, how do you awaken that citizen advocacy on these issues? It certainly makes my job more difficult because as opposed to just being in a response in a crisis mode. So I would say that this really goes back. You can frame it as political will, but what really is the basis for political will? And you have to want something, you have to show, you have to get up. We as technocrats and where we sit, we could frame programs, legislation. You know that there were draft regulations, but in going the distance through Parliament and being approved, there are lots of things that actually come into play there. And I will also say the private sector, and thanks, Andy. I mean, Andy has been a stalwart on this whole issue with this green transition. At the time, he was head of the Chamber of Commerce, and we did green economy scope and study. But that's Andy. When we think of the private sector, who are there really to maximize profit? I mean, that's their job, to get goods to market. But how do you really build a consciousness in the private sector to also help with the lobby to get these things done, as opposed to seeing that these things will just impact the cost of doing business? Business can't be sustained if we do the things that we do without the standards, regulations, because we basically destroy the society, we destroy the basis for economic activity. And there's that short-termism that we keep talking about. So this new partnership, I feel that it is needed. I would call on many of you out there, if there's a way to get that groundswell going, and you have MPs, you need to reach out to your MPs. You need to call on them. We have a charter. I don't know how many were actually aware of Article 4 of the charter. And so I think we have to join the dots. Robin, I do think that we've done a lot, but we need to do more. And that is all really I can say at this point. Over.
Thank you very much, Travis. Professor Mohan, are you satisfied with that response? And I see Mr. Armstrong's hand is up. Please go ahead, sir.
Okay, well, thank you to Travis, and I think he has hit the nail on the head. Politicians will do what they are pressured to do by their people. I mean, yes, they have certain things they want to do, but if their constituents are not making noise about it, then it's not likely to be high on their priorities. And I think, as Robin said about there's no regulations really in the Fisheries Act, and I think this is because often you'll have a handful of very vocal people saying, you can't control the size or the amount of fish we catch. And that's who the politicians will listen to. And it doesn't take a lot of people to sway it. So I guess that means for those of us who would like to see more protection for the environment, we have to be just as noisy as the handful of people who want to continue to extract as much as they can. On the private sector in general, I think there is a lot of people in the private sector who would like to see more done for the environment, but you have to understand a lot will not do it unless it's required. Because if one or two companies, I don't know, let's just take the same example of the hotel. If two companies buy a piece of land on the beach side by side, and the law says you can't build more than 5 stories, that's what they're going to buy, what they're going to do, because they paid a lot of money for that land, so they'll maximize it. If the law now says, well, hey, you can go 8 stories, or as we hear for the Hyatt, maybe 12 stories, they would be silly not to, because they're not going to maximize their profit. And so I think there needs to be very strong planning permission, and we really need to understand as a country what it is we want to see, because you can't just leave it up to the individuals to decide, well, hey, I could go 12 stories high, but I'm just going to go 5, because it just makes the project much less viable.
Thank you very much, Mr. Armstrong. I just want to flag a contribution from Ms. Peggy Antrobus. She says she agrees with Professor Mohan's outlook, and she says that there must be a discussion involving CSOs on the kind of development that we want in Barbados. We may not be able to change the paradigm, but we can determine what happens in Barbados. Thank you very much for that contribution, Ms. Antrobus. Okay, I see Dr. St. John's hand up. Please go ahead, Dr. St. John.
Oh, that's a legacy hand, sorry. Let me put it down.
Yes, that's okay. That's okay, thank you. On our second query, we're looking at the how. How can we strengthen, restore, and regenerate a positive relationship with nature? I mean, we're always talking about the ills and the concerns and the things that are wrong, but how are we going to be able to change that around? I know that some of you have been starting to allude to the how, but I'd like to pinpoint Are there any recommendations, apart from when our panelists would have made their presentations, are there any recommendations or suggestions coming straight out of this meeting as to how we can strengthen, restore and regenerate a positive relationship with nature? Panelists, audience. Okay, I'm going to choose, perhaps I'll ask Reggie to respond to this. Reggie, if you don't mind.
Oh, I do mind. But I think it's a really difficult challenge ahead of us. I think a lot of it has a lot of our, especially I can say younger people, are heavily influenced by the cultural activities that they see on the media, whether it's social media or traditional media, out of the continental countries, which sort of like sets a tone for how they behave and what they expect, or how they figure they should be expected to behave. So I think a lot of it has to do now is to get our young people to understand that they live within an island environment, and so what you can do within an island environment when it comes to living, it's not the same. It's just like saying we talk about landfills, but landfilling in an island environment which has limited land space, for example, is not necessarily the maybe not the best technology or best methodology for waste management. So I think a lot of the stuff that we sort of have to reconnect, I think, a lot to our history and really what we can manage within our society. It's just the same as when I was a very young child. Our grandparents or my grandparents used to do composting, but it wasn't called composting at the time. And we started to talk about composting again in the last 20 years, or maybe 15 years, and as if it was something totally new, when in truth and in fact it was something we were doing before. So it really is about getting us to understand where we live and what we can really do within the environment that we live in, and to get that young people to sort of take their minds out of the North American and European paradigm and back into the island paradigm. So it's a matter of sort of like managing expectations. So that would my take on that.
Okay. Thanks very much, Reggie. Professor Mahan, it would be good to hear from you. You've also stated in the chat that perhaps we have not answered question 1 in its entirety. So please feel free to go ahead and to respond to your original question, if we can share your thoughts with that one on that, and then perhaps also share your thoughts on, are we really aware of the state and limits of our natural environment? Over to you, Professor Mahan. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. I was not expecting to be speaking. I was quite happily typing away in the chat all of the things that I had thought about. I accept that all of the various things about educating and informing the public and marshalling public support for various measures which have hitherto been unpopular, all of those are important aspects of what we're doing. But those are slow processes, as far as I can tell. And I still think that we have been basically delinquent in putting in place some measures which are pretty straightforward. I don't think anybody would disagree that we should not be putting pollutants in the sea. I imagine that the control of that is difficult, but it is something clearly that if we want to have a healthy ocean, we have to do. And likewise, control of fishing. I mean, control of fishing is a fairly standard practice among governments in developed countries. And it has social implications, of course, that fishers are often seen to be among the most disadvantaged people or among the poorer, and that we should not be taking steps that impact on their livelihoods. But the fact of the matter is that if we restore fish stocks, they will actually have better catches. To me, these are no-brainers. And until we can actually do some of these things and persuade our political directorate to do them, not necessarily through a mass movement, but I think there is a need for more vocal persons to be pushing for this and to be bringing it up in the media and so forth. So that's where I stand on that. In terms of limits, I think we are far away from recognizing that we cannot have physical growth indefinitely and putting some limits on that. I mean, a simple area there is conversion of agricultural land into housing. How far are we prepared to go with that? We all know that's not a good thing to do, but how far are we prepared to go with it? That is the need for a serious discussion and for actually somebody having the courage to set limits on that. So I mean, those are just a couple of simple ideas. I wasn't really prepared to speak at any great length, but I just would leave it with that. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Professor Mahan. And picking up on your point about marine pollution, I'd like to invite Dr. Leo Brewster, who I know is on this call, please, to share his thoughts on marine pollution and fisheries as it relates to the discussion now. Dr. Brewster, are you?
Hi, Donna. Morning to everybody. I tend to agree with everything that has been said so far. I agree that marine pollution has been a perennial problem for the island. Different approaches have been taken to try to initiate actions to deal with the control of such pollution, but the regulations, as always, have been somewhat slow to come aboard since passing the Marine Pollution Control Act in 1998 for EPD to enforce. It doesn't mean that actions aren't being taken though, because EPD has in the past been able to enforce on a couple of polluters through the same Marine Pollution Control Act and associated with it the Public Health Services Act. So some aspects are taken, but there is still the need for greater emphasis to deal with that. And I do know that EPD is looking towards the rollout of the regulations, hopefully this year. They have been working behind the scenes to try to get certain aspects done, and Dr. Hugh Seeley was integrally involved in that the early stages, and then it went into hiatus, but they have been revamping it over the last 18 months, and they are looking to try to get them finalized during this current financial year, hopefully. I think one of the difficulties always with legislation is that people are very fast to work on drafting the actual act for dealing with a specific matter, but not the regulations to follow on. And I mean, the same thing happened with the Coastal Zone Management Act. And as part of our rewrite now, because we are looking to update our own act, we will be looking to do the necessary schedules and regulations associated with the act for a comprehensive rollout also this year. As it speaks to fisheries, you know that fisheries has been a major bone of contention with me for some time now, principally as I believe in what Robin said. Some aspects of fisheries regulation can be implemented. I think was obviously the greatest problem is the need for change across the sector and the willingness for the sector to recognize that we are no longer in a situation where, you know, the fishery as you would know it, whether it be flying fish, whether it be dolphin, whether it be kingfish, whether it be barracuda, whether it be snapper, whether it be tuna, is not what it was 40 years ago. Okay, And for the most part, a lot of the fish stocks themselves are migratory. They pass through the region, and everybody is taking off their own piece of the stock as they pass through. So, need for looking at aspects that can deal with perhaps even quotas, etc., has fast been a time for approaching new means of enforcement, and definitely things like where you see a dolphin fish that is only 12 inches long being caught, that is wrong. It's wrong, but it can't be supported. Even your customer base is recognizing that is wrong, but to be capturing a dolphin so small, but it still persists, and it is one of those things that, as a result of sargassum, there have been several spin-off impacts resulting in the same clustering of the dolphin around sargassum and making it, quote unquote, easier to catch such a young fish. But when you impact the juvenile cohort at that size, down the road, 3 years from now or 18 months from now, you're going to find there's a void missing because you've overfished the juveniles. Okay. So I do think that there is a need for revisiting a lot of stuff that speaks to aspects of fisheries management within Barbados. And I do know that the Fisheries Division has been working on the regulations. They've concluded all their necessary consultations, and that is envisions also supposed to go this year. Former Minister Humphrey, that was one of his things that he wanted to see before the election was called come into fruition. And we do know that was more or less finalized now, and it's supposed to be on the road to the Chief Parliamentary Council for just having it put into the necessary legalese so that it can then be done, having done all the consultation with all the different fishing sector participants along the way. But there is a need for change in fisheries. It's a real reality that has to be faced by the fisheries sector and by the stakeholders within the sector. And, I just hope that it is something that when it does get rolled out, there will be resistance, but there must also be the need for enforcement and penalties applied in certain situations when below minimum size fish are being caught, or fisheries sector sizes are too small and not in conformity with the regulations. Over.
Thanks very much, Dr. Brewster. I just want to draw attention to a comment by Mr. Armstrong. He said one longtime spear fisherman told him, and I quote, "I feel real hard to spare these little fish, but if I don't, someone else will come and do it tomorrow." Food for thought, I believe. But we do take the point, Dr. Brewster and Professor Mahan, that regulations are indeed needed if we are to consider that we will want to have a fisheries sector in the future. And we are really and truly projecting on and thinking about our future. On that note, I just want to mention that tomorrow's consultation/conversation around the Stockholm Plus 50 celebration is going to be looking at sustainable and inclusive recovery. We know that having had COVID, we are prompted to have these discussions about recovery. There's also a major push in many of our islands, including Barbados, to look more closely at green recovery. But we will hear more about that tomorrow, because recovery is not just about the environment, of course, it's also looking at our environment, at our economic as well as social recovery. I believe Dr. St. John has also alluded to some of the work that CARFRA is already doing with respects to its partnership with CERMES. So let us stay tuned, and I hope to see some of you back tomorrow as well to continue some of these discussions. Tomorrow's focus again being sustainable and inclusive recovery. Now I'm going to look very quickly at our third bit of food for thought, and I'm going to target perhaps one of the few young people among us today. So Shannon Weeks from CYEN, I thank you very much for joining us. And this question goes out to everybody in this session, but Shannon, I'm going to come to you first. And the question is, in the next 50 years, are there new ideas, policies, and programs that are needed to restore our natural environment? And if you can at least identify two when you make your interventions, I'd appreciate it. Again, in the next 50 years, we're looking ahead, we're looking at our future. Are there new ideas, policies, and programs that are needed to restore our natural environment? And you're free to identify at least two of them. So Shannon, over to you to start the ball rolling on this occasion. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. It's just a pleasure to be here. I would say yes, that there is need for new, but also to really look back at some of the strategies that we would have in place and see what was the struggles or what was the reasons for them not being 100% successful, and maybe continue to build from that from those failures that we have seen in currently and in the past. Currently, I don't think I'm able to identify two strategies, unfortunately.
That's okay, Shannon. Thank you very much, though, for starting the ball rolling. Is there anyone else in the audience who can perhaps add to Shannon's thinking in this regard? Because she certainly gave us one strategy, and I think it's an important one, that we review what the barriers were to getting to where we needed to be. And as Travis would have mentioned in his discourse earlier, every 10 years, we seem to be going through the same motions, but are we actually getting the actions to really and truly address the concerns, address the issues? And now we have on top, and every 10 years, we seem to have something else that is added to our burden. And I would say right away that we are looking at COVID as an added burden to all of the issues that pertain to environment, to the economy, and obviously impacting our society negatively. So is there anyone else that I can call on? I see David Bino is also in our audience. David, would you help us, please, in thinking about the next 50 years, given the kind of work that you are doing through the Small Grants Program, the UNDP Jeff Small Grants Program? We're looking at the new ideas, the policies, and the programs that are needed to restore our natural environment. We'd love to hear from you on this, please, David. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much for allowing me to make a contribution. I just want to say that the discussion this morning thus far has been very encouraging. I see that there's consensus in terms of the way forward. But with reference to the future, I think you started correctly by including the young lady that spoke, because the future really lies within our youth. So if you had to look at one integral strategy for the future, is to ensure that we expose our youth to the environment and to models of sustainability. And that's why the Just Small Grants Program plays such an integral role at the community level, because we actively target youth and create models that they can see, immerse themselves in, experience, and also learn from. And that's important, because the youth, they're our future. And if we can embed them within that whole thinking of sustainability, then that's a big battle won. But in addition to that, if I had to look at a second strategy for sustainability, it would be to ensure that we incorporate civil society in a more meaningful way within the development of policy as it relates to sustainability in the Caribbean. I think that we have been losing capacity at a rapid pace within civil society, and we need to look at active approach to empowering civil society. And when we empower them, it also means that we give them open access to these policy spaces. Many times policies are being formulated, but civil society, unfortunately, are on the sidelines. And I think they're too critical to the achievement of the 2030 agenda for us to do so. So if we're looking forward in the future, Civil society needs to be empowered. They need to be placed on a level playing field. And therefore, we need to do everything in our power to catalyze this. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, David. We cannot overemphasize the importance of partnerships with civil society. Very, very key. Thanks very much for your input. And of course, the focus on the youth and the innovative work that we see coming out of your Jeff Small Grants program. I think that more of us, not only in this grouping, but more of Barbados needs to remain hopeful, or can remain hopeful, when we see some of the outputs from that program indeed. Thanks again, David. Travis, I'm going to come to you next because we are looking at policy. What are some of the new ideas, policies, and programs that can help us to restore our natural environment? So over to you. Thank you, Travis.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Just to, if I go back even to the discussions around fisheries, and I know Dr. Brewster is aware of my thoughts around fisheries management, in that as we move along, we need to modernize our systems. So it's not just fisheries, the whole natural resources governance of Barbados needs a serious overhaul to weed out the redundancies, to stop the triplication, also to look at the next generation of environmental stewards, or education programs at every level, preparing us to deal with the challenge and the question, what is the challenge? You know, we are, there are many dynamic issues to this. I mean, the population is changing. The climate is changing. We're heading to 2.7 world at this pace. And that will have massive implications for how we live, or availability of certain natural resources. But how do we keep track of the environment? How do we keep track of natural resources? And how are we ready to respond to issues? Because that dynamic will put pressures on the very base. So I think the modernization and the use of technology, in as much as possible to help with the observation. I still want to reiterate that from a governance standpoint, how do you get persons, but June 5th is the World Environment Day. I mean, our NGOs prepare to go and meet with their parliamentarians. There is now mandated a constituency day. How many of those constituency meetings are going to look at environmental issues at that level? And it's those things that if we, this Stockholm is a whole of government, whole of society. How we get those things to come together will certainly help. The last point, and David, I want to thank David. About 7-8 years ago, there was a movement to build out what is called major groups in the Caribbean and Barbados, and led by small grants. And I think how citizens organize, that is a mechanism that perhaps we need to pay more attention to, because we can't, advocacy is how to sustain advocacy without risk it becoming mundane and boring. But we need to find systems that would allow greater citizen engagement with parliamentarians. And I think those, are the three. Again, if there's a fourth, we used to have a Governor General's Environmental Award for issues of sustainability. And David mentioned about the sustainability models and exposing young persons. Perhaps there are successes, we just don't celebrate, we just keep moving. And those are things, again, that you as citizens of Barbados, you can call for, and we have a new president, there's a new republic, there's a new charter, perhaps that could be framed around there. Over.
Thanks very much for that contribution, Travis. Agreed. We do have to find ways of inspiring our citizens. And of course, looking at the things that we've done in the past, I think I'm going to agree even more with Shannon's input, where she mentioned that we need to look back at what we've done, look and see where we have perhaps not done as well as we would have hoped to do, and see how we can perhaps even build on what is already in place. Why reinvent the wheel when we do have some very good best practices that we seem to have forgotten about or that we are simply ignoring? And for me, always, there's a place for civil society to drive the advocacy that is required if we are going to be making the kind of difference as a whole society. So thanks again for that input. I'm just going to read a comment from Kathy Gibbs, and thank you for joining us, Kathy, where she says, I think bringing a broader awareness to nature by the broader public, maybe more nature appreciation in the school curriculum. As she sees that as being useful. I can't disagree with you at all, Kathy, but I will also let you know that for many years, Barbados' school curricula in the traditional sense of our academic or the way that we address our academia at the school level has taken environment into account. And I can speak firsthand on this, certainly for the last 30 years. We do have it now even in our Cub Scouts and Girl Guides activities that there's always an environmental badge. Environment and awareness of the natural environment and our natural resources has been mainstreamed in 100 different ways through our education system. The issue becomes champions for ensuring that the youth continue to benefit from the uptake of this kind of outreach. For example, in the school setting, if there's a teacher who is all about environment and they do all the environment activities, the hikes, the cleanups, all those things happen, awareness is built. And then that teacher disappears off the scene from that particular school. We often find that the champion, we need a new champion. And so we need to have that level of advocacy perhaps built across civil society where people are asking for these things to happen. I will also let you know that at the primary, secondary, and certainly at the CSEC and CAPE levels, environmental awareness, natural resource management is actually part of the formal education structure. So what I was discussing before with the Girl Guides, et cetera, would form part of our non-formal environmental education activities. But certainly in the case of being in the curriculums, natural resources management, environment, sustainable development as well is also forming a major part of the school curricula. And so it means that we also have to do more work outside of the school system. More informal and non-formal activities need to take place. And that is where we, the citizens, have to come in. So I just thought I would share that very briefly with you. Now, at this time, I'm going to introduce our second poll for this activity. And yes, I know that we are scheduled to end around 12, but given the rich discussion and the fact that you're all still here with us, and I wish to thank you so much. We won't detain you much longer because we know everyone is busy, but we absolutely are enjoying your input. So the second poll is up at this time. We are looking specifically at healthy planet and prosperity for all. There are just, I think, 2 questions. So if you don't mind, just take a couple of minutes to participate in the poll. I'd really appreciate that. And then we're going to move on to the rest of our discussion, and then we will wrap up just around 12. So thank you again, and do go ahead and do remember, do join us tomorrow. Tomorrow's discussion takes us even further into what we've been looking at today, because we're looking more closely now at recovery and sustainability, and of course, inclusivity, a hallmark perhaps of successful sustainable development activity. Thank you. So yes, just about 2 minutes to complete the poll. Thank you.
So we have at this stage 22 responses. So I'll just allow a few more minutes so we can complete and have as much participation as possible. This far regarding question 1, there is an overwhelming majority of responses in favor of bestowing rights on nature in the same way that human rights have been established. So this far it's 18 responses in favor and 4 against it. With regard to the second question, which is how often should we report on the health of Barbados's environment? The leading response is 12 months, with 9 responses in favor of reporting every 12 months, 8 in favor of reporting every 24 months, and 5 in favor of reporting every 6 months. And not seeing any more responses, so I think we can end the poll now.
Right. Thanks very much, Sam. And thank you all for participating in that poll. I do believe, well, certainly with regards to question 2, and yes, this is my opinion. I don't know what my other colleagues might think, but certainly having an understanding of the health of our environment, more or less to the state of our environment. Perhaps that is something that we do need to pay closer attention to. And maybe one of the outputs of this process could be that Barbados has the recommendation for those of us who are in favor of having, and certainly everyone seems to be in favor of having an understanding of the state of our environment, that there should be the publication of a state of environment report for Barbados. I believe the last one was done somewhere around 2002, 2003, the last one that I recall. I could be wrong, but I think that this would be an ideal way to also engage our citizens in understanding where we are and what is our contribution to a healthy planet and, of course, prosperity for all. So thanks very much for participating in that poll. In terms of the rights, I see that we have an overwhelming support for bestowing rights for the environment as we have human rights. So let's see how that goes. And if we will have the type of framework required to ensure that this can be done in the context of Barbados. So thank you all for participating. So now I'm going to move on very quickly to the stage just before we begin to wrap up. We don't want to lose any other participants at this stage. We did have a couple more queries, and you can sort of ruminate on these, or if you want to make a quick intervention, I'd be happy. I think we've gone through basically the kinds of institutional changes that government, private sector, civil society need to participate in. We've made it clear that certainly regulations and the enforcement of regulations and the establishment of a specific act or law which speaks to environmental issues should be formulated. Professor Mohan did remind us that there has been a draft Environmental Act for some time. But one question that I thought that I should not miss is, are we engaging marginalized and vulnerable groups sufficiently in ecosystem restoration programs? And how can we facilitate greater participation of these groups? So are we engaging marginalized and vulnerable groups sufficiently in ecosystem restoration programs? And how can we facilitate greater participation of these groups? I would like to hear from someone.
Hi, hello.
Yes,
hi.
Yes, Travis, go ahead.
Hi, I think there has been a lot of activity, particularly through the small grants program, and David is here. Just up to Friday, there are many community groups that are getting involved in that type of activity. But I think that there's clearly scope for more. And it's interesting, Robin and Patrick were talking about regenerative Barbados, and it's good to hear of that new initiative, and I look forward to hearing more. But one of the global platforms before us is the Decade for Ecosystems Restoration. And I think that offers partnership opportunities, as opposed to just letting the observance pass. perhaps we, again, in government and the civil society and those NGOs and the private sector can focus on one or two of our ecosystems. I mean, it could be gullies, it could be beach ecosystems, but this is something that perhaps we can have a focused conversation around. I know there's talk of the national park system as well, but again, we can use the decade to frame, to monitor, to plan, and see again how we can by 2030 have an impact at the grassroots level on some of those systems. And I would say as well, this is something calling on you to reach out to the Ministry of the Environment, to see how we can get these programs going. Over.
Thank you very much for that, Travis. I see Leo's hand up. Dr. Rooster, please go ahead.
Hi, yeah, I tend to think that generally we have a limited involvement with vulnerable groups being involved in ecosystem restoration. There are approaches and attempts from the mainstream local NGOs and the new NGOs that are starting to pop up like mushrooms. But I find generally that you're not seeing a level of involved participation, really. I mean, in terms of looking at ecosystems at that level, maybe some NGOs think that it's too scientific, and therefore the type of work that needs to be done would be above their heads. So therefore, you have like what we had this weekend, which is like this major gully cleanup thing, right? Which is in its own right, it highlights what's going on in terms of illegal dumping and the types of things that are being dumped. But it was a cleanup effort. How much information was collected on that effort so that you can get a real representation in terms of the type of not only the quantity of material that was removed, but the myriad of what was in there to begin with, etc. I know that when the Environmental Association used to exist and you did things like Jack in the Box gully cleanup, you had some level of data being presented in terms of what was coming out. When we do the International Coastal Cleanup Day in September, a lot of people are out on the beach all around the island, and NGOs, either whether they be corporate or even local NGOs, are out, and they're just picking up the debris and the litter. And you're looking at how many bags of litter that you've picked up. But the itemized breakdown, if it is being collected, it isn't really and truly being reported either through the media or something. So maybe it's being presented on certain people's websites, I suppose. But there's a need for greater publicity in doing that sort of level of information. I really and truly think that whether or not you're looking at having vulnerable groups being involved, which would be of benefit, yes, but to heighten awareness and their own concern is one thing. But I think what we have to reach the stage at now is to look towards the approach to citizen science, whereby the same NGOs start to take on their own investigative monitoring roles and capacities to look at the monitoring of the environment from their own requirements or their own needs, or even to assist government if you want, in terms of looking at certain aspects of the quality and condition of the environment in the longer term, using basic acceptable approaches and methodologies that have been documented transglobally in terms of doing these things. And then they would have the freedom to report on matters as they want, but everyone keeps turning to government to say that government isn't releasing information and government has a myriad of information just sitting down in the black box that no one can get access to. And while that is true, there is the opportunity now for community groups to get out and start doing their own active monitoring if they want. I know that I think it was both Alexander and CP had started to actually get into doing certain aspects of beach monitoring over 10 years ago, when they used to do it as part of a SPA. But even in doing that, they used to report to their local community groups as to what they were doing or what they were finding in terms of the beaches in the area of Spicetown heading to the lower parts of St. Lucie. And that used to be well received. So there is opportunity for this to roll out into the future. I think it's an approach that should be looking to be more actively pursued now. Over.
Thanks for that, Leo. And building immediately on your suggestion for citizen science, and just before I go to you, Mr. Armstrong, I'd like to ask Professor Mahan as well as Professor McConney, Patrick McConney, who's joined us. What's really going on with regenerative Barbados? Are we able to reach those vulnerable groups through that particular stream? Robin or Patrick, do feel free to jump in. Thank you. Radio silence, gentlemen. Regenerative, you've got it. Yes, go ahead, please, Robin.
Yeah, excuse me. Regenerate Barbados is a small group of people who are trying to develop a program based on donut economics. And I put the connection, the link to that in the chat for those who may be interested, which is a combined environmental and social justice approach. And I won't spend time here expounding on what donut economics is and how it works. I will people who are interested can have a look for themselves, but there is a social foundation below which we do not want to see people go. And there is an environmental limit beyond which we should not be going. And together those provide within those foundational and limit spaces, there's the space of the donut, which is a safe and just place for humanity. In order to take a truly donut economics approach, you need to be working with and looking at issues relating to marginalized groups. And in our case, one of those areas that we're looking at is women, particularly women vendors, and the conditions under which they have to work, the kinds of facilities that they might need in order to be able to function properly. And especially the fact that women have double jobs in most cases, if not more. They come to work in the day, they have a day job, and then they also have a home job, which is minding children and making sure that the home functions and operates. And that a lot of the time the workplace does not accommodate the kinds of needs of people who are working in those uncertain, marginalized, for want of a better word, environments. And there are, so that's an area that we're interested in, but there are many other social justice areas too that donut economics would speak about, such as more employee ownership in companies to build wealth rather than having wealth concentrated in a few hands, to build wealth throughout the population. I mean, to fully expound would take quite a while, but that's the kind of areas that we're interested in. And in the environmental side, pesticides and pollutants, the availability of green space. Again, as Travis said, we're very interested in how the national park is going to unfold and be rolled out. So, you know, those are areas. It's a holistic approach, and we would certainly love to have anybody else who looks into the donut economics and Regenerate Barbados links that Patrick has provided. You know, contact us and join us. We'd love to have you. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, Robin. I also want to acknowledge Hallam Hope's contributions in the context of the chat. Thank you very much for your support as well, as we discussed the input into the school curriculum and in non-formal education spheres for children to learn more about nature-based conservation, etc. Thank you for that. Now over to Mr. Andy Armstrong. Andy, thank you once again for joining us today. You had a comment based on the last question, and I'd also invite you as our first panelist to share your closing thoughts as we are preparing to close. Thank you kindly.
Okay, well, thank you, Donna. Yeah, the comment was, I don't know if everyone here is aware of the Land Conservancy. I know Robin is because he and I are both involved with it. Lanny Edgell is the point person for us. We're still in the process of trying to get all the legal paperwork done, and it's frustrating sometimes by how much legal paperwork you have to do in Barbados just to get a nonprofit set up. But we're almost there, and what the Land Conservancy is trying to do is to make sure we protect those areas in Barbados of great natural beauty. You know, Graham Hall, Long Pond. We're looking at places like Chancery Lane, the Hole in Hole Town. We don't really have a lot of wetlands left in Barbados anymore, and most of them are under threat. So I know Lanny has had a good conversation with the Minister of the Environment on Graham Hall, and so hopefully we'll see some fruit coming out of that. So if anyone is interested, the Land Conservancy is one of those that's trying to regenerate natural ecosystems within Barbados. And again, a great session. And as Travis made the point, talk to your parliamentarian, and you know, I definitely will take his advice and I will reach out to mine. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Armstrong, for joining us. I know you're very busy as well, so thanks to all of you who joined us, who've taken time out of your schedules to be with us this morning. Please remember that we're on again tomorrow and on Wednesday with 2 other consultations. We really would appreciate your input going forward. We will obviously share the links with you. I believe the links are available for tomorrow and for Wednesday's sessions. Now, as we are closing, I'm going to also let you know Dr. Joyce St. John has already left the event. She has thanked us for allowing her to participate, and we wish to thank her, even though in her absence, for her major contribution and her substantial contribution to today's conversations, remembering that partnership and that the link between environment and health is inextricable. I'm going to invite now to make his closing remarks, Mr. Reggie Burke of CYEN. Please go ahead, Reggie.
Hi, Donna, and thanks for this, inviting me to participate in this very engaging event. I've lots of food for thought. So just let me say that perhaps, let me close by saying that perhaps we would have reached another platform when we have political meetings and politicians are talking about environmental issues. I can't recall, well, here in Barbados and certainly in other countries in the Caribbean, any such dialogue on a political platform. But I think that might be a very good indicator that we're making progress. And so the issue of calling out your parliamentarians or your representatives is perhaps a strategy that we need to pay some closer attention to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reggie. I'm happy that we've got consensus on whom next to tackle in terms of getting some of our sustainability issues not only on the table, but resolved. And I think, as we have already said, we need to have a whole of society approach, and therefore we cannot be excluding anyone, whether it be vulnerable group or politician, from our quest towards sustainable development. Thanks again. And given, I think now I'm going to invite Travis as one of our panelists and our final panelist to make his closing remarks before we actually close this session. Travis, over to you. Thank you.
And thank you again, Donna. Just again, endorsing the various proposals. Perhaps in the citizen science program Dr. Brewster referenced, I think that requires further elaboration, but it's something that we need. I think how technology has evolved and what's in the palm of your hand with your cell phone, that could be a very good tool to support the types of observation requirements for managing our commons. The next thing to pick up again on the business, as I said, I left the business finance world in 1994, thinking I would go on and save the planet. And I think I'd like to see a more focus on that, even in the university, how business and environment can really be put into a frame to allow them to become major actors. So again, I want to thank you, and I want to thank everyone, and good day.
Thanks very much for that, Travis. Before we close, I see Leo's hand is still up. Leo, we are closing out. Is your hand up from your previous intervention, or do you
Yes,
have
it
another?
is. No, that's it. I have to take it down, sorry.
Okay, thank you very much. So now as we close, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to invite Ms. Crystal Drakes to just give the official thank you and to walk us through the next steps. So thanks very much, Crystal.
Yes, thank you, Donna. As you can see, I'm smiling from ear to ear. I was quietly listening in and wanting to intervene at points, but I knew I had to take on the role of managing in the background today. But I want to first thank everyone on behalf of Professor Winston Moore from UWI, who is the national coordinator for this. I am assisting him as his colleague on this initiative. I want to thank our panelists for their engaging thoughts. And because most of this was a bit short notice, I'm very appreciative of their participation. I also want to thank all of the familiar faces and names that I saw in the participants list today, as well as any new persons who would have joined today in terms of being involved in this type of engagement. Your input is really needed in this process. And I just want to say a few things as we wrap up. What is clear coming out of this first dialogue is the need for citizen empowerment so that in turn influences the political agenda. And I think there's room and there's scope for the Stockholm plus 50 process in Barbados to engage and revitalize that type of movement that Travis was talking about. I believe that was in the early 90s when I was a wee lad, or lady, I should say. But I think there's scope there for the Stockholm plus 50 initiative to revitalize that movement. And given the players that are in the audience today, I think we have a good momentum to work with. I also want to state that there was a point made by Reginald Burke from CYEN, and he talked about including cultural aspects. We have to ensure that there's a cultural dimension to environmental management and sustainability. And he made the point that is what is possibly the missing link to citizen engagement or greater citizen engagement. And I would want us all to walk away thinking of how do we, from a cultural perspective, further integrate into our discussions the environmental management and sustainable development of Barbados. What I would also want to do at this time is to invite, obviously, everyone to the second online discussion that we're going to have tomorrow, entitled Sustainable and Inclusive Recovery Post-COVID-19, and we'll have a panel which will comprise of representatives from the Ministry of Economic Affairs, the Barbados Association of Retired Persons, and the Barbados Manufacturing Association, and PAHO as well. So I encourage everyone to join us tomorrow, and also tell a friend or two about these consultations, because we want really a whole of society approach. As was mentioned earlier, we will be wrapping this up on May 3rd, at least the first phase, where we will be having an in-person face-to-face dialogue. And I'm hoping that all who are on the call will be able to join us once those invitations go out. So Donna, thank you very much. Thank the panelists again, thank the participants. It really was a good, engaging discussion. And I think we have a way forward in terms of where the Stockholm plus 50 process integrates itself into strengthening environmental governance, as Travis Sinclair from the Ministry of Environment has repeatedly said over on the call. Thank you so much, Donna, and thank you all.
Thanks again, Crystal. And ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of our first session where we're discussing Stockholm plus 50. Where is Barbados going to be perhaps even in 50 years? This has been an engaging experience, certainly for me, and I'm hoping it was for all of you. Thanks again. Do enjoy your day, and we look forward to your participation in sessions 2 and 3 for tomorrow and Wednesday. And of course, beyond, there is a phase 2 coming. So thanks again, stay safe, and have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you again.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Goodbye.